Great Britain truly is a nation of ever-changing landscapes and amazing journeys. During a short trip around this incredible island, it will become quickly apparent that no two sights are ever the same, and each visual treasure has something particularly enticing and unique to offer. The length of Britain may only be in the region of 800 miles, yet over this distance we can experience all manner of natural wonders, from volcanoes and mountains, massive rivers and lakes, right through to imposing factory buildings and miles of man-made canals that once heralded the beginnings of our modern industrial world. As you will soon see, for such a small place, it really is brimming with delights, and it's easy to understand why it has influenced artists, industrialists and travellers on an international scale down through the ages. One of the major reasons for Britain's incredibly varied geographical features and consequent land uses are the rocks and boulders that form the British Isles. Now, it's fair to say that stones aren't necessarily on first appearance the stuff of dreams, but without them we would, quite literally, be all at sea. Rocks are vital to us as they constitute a considerable part of planet Earth, but it's only when you see such examples as the intriguing formation of rocks that make up the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, or the majestic craggy scenery of the Pennine Hills, known as the backbone of England, that you begin to see rocks as the underpinning of every stunning landscape you are likely to see. Throughout this programme, we will be travelling all over the British Isles to discover the natural spectacles of this captivating land and investigate the effect it has had on everyone who encounters it. However, when you look a little more closely, you will realise that Great Britain is actually made up of 4 very individual countries, and the people of Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England are as different and distinctive as the landscapes in which they live. It's incredible that countries divided only by a man-made border can vary so much, not only making life for the traveller very much easier, but also full of fascination, as anyone who's actually travelled from Land's End at the southernmost tip of England to John O'Groats, the most northerly point of Scotland, will tell you. The Scottish nation is renowned for its high mountains, beautiful lochs, wild dramatic countryside and magnificent castles. And the landscape of Wales, although greener and less rugged than Scotland, still has more than its fair share of mountains and picturesque valleys, which entice equally as many visitors in search of unspoiled Britain year in, year out. Cross the sea to Northern Ireland and the landscape will change again, and you quickly appreciate why this nation and its neighbour Éire is described as the Emerald Isle. However, despite being different again to Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland has a drama all its own. But should your mood be more tranquil, the rolling hills and meandering rivers of England will fit the bill perfectly, while a stroll through one of the country's many woods or charming villages is far better than any medical prescription for stress relief. So, you see already that each nation has a very different geographic profile, but the people of these countries are equally as responsible for shaping the landscape as the hills and rivers that carve out our best loved views. Great tunnels have been cut through the mountains and hills to allow trains to pass, preceded by ditches that were dug the length and breadth of the British Isles in order for the canals of the inland waterways to be constructed. Cities, towns, villages, and even tiny hamlets also punctuate Britain's countryside, and we'll start our journey by taking a ferry to visit Northern Ireland for a closer look at what this often overlooked corner of the United Kingdom has to offer. Down through the ages, there have been many conflicts between English governments and Scotland, Wales and Ireland. Mention the name of Oliver Cromwell even today in Scotland and Ireland, and he is still hated for ruthlessly trying to dominate these two proud nations. However, when it comes to Northern Ireland, it's more recent conflicts that have created images of battle-scarred cities. Yet travelling just a short distance out into the countryside will reveal a tranquillity unspoiled by feuding factions. Think of the geographical features of Northern Ireland, and the first port of call has to be the Giant's Causeway. The vast arrays of hexagonal-shaped rock columns that seem to climb out of the sea create a truly marvellous sight, and even in our technologically advanced age, the geology of this place is as intriguing as it ever was. The witty Dr. Johnson paid the Giant's Causeway a somewhat backhanded compliment back in the 18th century when he said it was worth seeing but not worth going to see. However, few today would agree with him. Now Ireland, north and south, is famous the world over for wonderful myths and legends, and as well as the more traditional geological explanations of how the Giant's Causeway got here, you'll also discover a very colourful account of its origin from Irish folklore. There was a great Irish warrior called Finn MacCool, and over the centuries, as the legends of his antics grew, so did the man himself, and eventually he ended up being transformed into a giant. It is Finn who is credited with building this causeway across the Irish Sea, having discovered a female giant on a Scottish island that had taken his fancy. He built his causeway from Northern Ireland all the way to the island of Staffa off the west coast of Scotland, the only other place in the world where you can find similar rock formations protruding from the sea. But Finn wasn't the only giant enamoured of the mighty giantess, and the Scottish giant, Benandonna, refused to give her up without a fight. Benandonna decided to walk over the causeway and challenge his rival, but Finn saw the giant pacing across the sea, and knowing he was no match in size, realised he would have to outwit the fearsome Scot. When Benandonna reached Ireland, Finn MacCool's sister entertained him with tea and cakes, as Finn was away from home. Cunningly, Finn MacCool had put stones in the cakes, and the Scottish giant broke his teeth eating them. Benandonna thought Finn must be a really tough giant to eat cakes like these, and when he saw Finn's baby sleeping, he became really scared. The baby was none other than Finn himself, wrapped up in a blanket, wearing a bonnet. Benandonna was terrified. If Finn's baby was this big, then how tall must this Irish warrior actually be? Without waiting to find out, Benandonna fled back to Scotland, destroying the causeway as he ran. Finn saw the giant's departure and scooped up large handfuls of earth which he flung at his rival. One of the pieces of land hurtled through the air and just missed the target before falling into the sea. It's said that this missile formed the Isle of Man, and the hole in the ground that was left, not far from Belfast, filled with water to become Loch Ness. The legend of Finn MacCool and the Giant's Causeway certainly gives us an interesting take on the geographical landscape of Northern Ireland, but science also gives us an equally fascinating version of events. The Giant's Causeway was actually formed by the heating up and rapid cooling of molten basalt, a process that forced the rock to crack into these intriguing hexagonal shapes. This chain of events was as a result of a volcanic eruption thought to have been more than 60 million years ago, so we can quite honestly say that this incredible landscape of Britain has remained unchanged for a very long time indeed. If we were able to walk over the Giant's Causeway and make our way to Staffa, we would find ourselves on one of Scotland's 800 islands that are scattered around the mainland. However, Scotland's landscape is very different to that found in Northern Ireland, despite the comparatively short distance between the two countries. And Scotland is very different to the other nations of the United Kingdom, politically as well as geographically, because in 1999 Scottish devolution was agreed, giving Scotland more freedom to govern itself. Although this official separation occurred in Scotland's more recent history, geologically speaking, the English and Scottish nations were always divided. Scotland was created from an entirely different piece of rock than the rest of Britain, 2,500 million years ago, having once been part of Greenland and North America. It wasn't until 375 million years ago, as the continents moved very slowly around the globe, that England and Scotland fused together to form the single landmass that we know and love to this day. When you look out over the Scottish landscape, the difference between Scotland and the rest of Great Britain is apparent straight away, as you can physically see that they derive from two very different continents. Scotland is made up of mountains and lochs, and although there are delightful lakes and mountains aplenty elsewhere throughout the United Kingdom, the landscape of Scotland has its own distinctive character. It will probably come as something of a surprise that our destination to view a range of truly dramatic Scottish geological formations will not take us to some isolated highland or island, because we are heading for Edinburgh, the stunningly beautiful city that is the Scottish capital. Welcome to Arthur's Seat, just a stone's throw, if you'll pardon the pun, from the hustle and bustle of the Royal Mile. This haven for nature and wildlife is surrounded by urban growth, but has proved indestructible despite having been once capable of causing a fair amount of devastation of its own, because Arthur's Seat is actually a volcano. There's no cause for panic though. The people of Edinburgh are perfectly safe, as this volcano's been extinct for millions of years, and there's never likely to be another eruption. The summit of Arthur's Seat is the city's highest point, and the views are a delight. But you can imagine that when it erupted all those millions of years ago, the molten lava covered the landscape around Edinburgh, including that other dominant geographical feature, the Castle Rock. A visit to Edinburgh Castle is a must for the many visitors who flock to this city quite literally from all over the world, but few actually pay much attention to the incredible geological formation that it stands upon. The geographical term for the Castle Rock is Crag and Tail, and it would have been forged out of the last ice age. A glacier, basically a river of ice, passed over the land and slowly eroded away any rock in its path. But when the ice encountered a particularly dense patch, such as Castle Rock, it was only able to erode the softer matter around it, leaving the harder rock untouched. For the great castle builders that would come later, the solid crag was a perfect place to build a fortress, and you only have to look at Edinburgh Castle to see why. Even though there are huge differences between Scotland and the rest of Britain, there are also some significant variations between this northern nation's highlands and lowlands. The lowlands are the flatter, more densely colonised areas of the south and central Scotland, and the highlands are the wilder, starker areas of the north. Life in both districts can be very contrasting, with the historic clans of the Highlands being very hardy, resourceful folk who fought for their survival from the land. The Scots of the Lowlands alternatively embraced the Industrial Revolution, building larger cities where they moved away from rural life. But there is one product synonymous with Scotland that unites its people, namely whisky. And should you want to find the very best examples of the true spirit of Scotland, then head for the Highlands and Islands. The Highlands of Scotland have a unique landscape which provides everything required to make what some would argue to be the finest whisky. For a truly great malt whisky, you need water, and the life-giving liquid literally comes from the mountains of the Highlands. Perfect for catching the untainted rain that falls in plentiful supply throughout the year, visitors may complain at the high rainfall figures for Scotland, but whisky enthusiasts never will. And what's more, this wet weather also helps the Scots grow their world-famous barley, that other great staple of whisky production. Now, although the next ingredient isn't technically compulsory, using peat to fire the kilns that malt the barley will give Scotch whisky a very distinctive taste, and if you travel to Islay, one of the nation's islands, you'll find the best examples of whisky made in this way. You can also find the traditional peat bogs from which this great natural resource is cut, and as you sip a wee dram from a distillery such as this one here at Bowmore, you can quite literally taste the flavour of the Scottish landscape, wherever in the world you happen to be. And on that very pleasant note, we'll head southwest to Wales, where a nice cup of tea and a slice of Barrabrith, a wonderful Welsh fruited loaf, is more likely to be the order of the day. Now, as well as such wholesome culinary delicacies, Wales is also affectionately known by many as the land of song, due to the country's rich history steeped in music and male voice choirs. So let's take a closer look at the Welsh landscape that inspires such a unique national character. The remoter areas of Wales, like much of Scotland, have remained relatively unspoiled, with much of the central part of the country only populated with a handful of villages and towns. Even though the countryside is perhaps less dramatic compared to Scotland, Wales has its own individual character. The Welsh are a proud people who celebrate their heritage and their countryside with a deep-veined passion, and you only have to spend a short time in Wales to understand why this country stirs up so much national pride for inhabitants and visitors alike. Snowdon is the tallest mountain in Wales and is one of the nation's most famous geographical features. Every year people come to climb to its peak and relax in the national park's tranquil atmosphere. Situated in northern Wales, Snowdonia is a huge glaciated valley which covers about 800 square miles, with Snowdon itself being the highest point. The area really does look like it's come straight out of a geography textbook, and it's easy to see how the ice of the glaciers cut through the land to create such amazing rock formations. Equally, it doesn't take too much imagination to visualise dinosaurs and prehistoric creatures roaming this wild landscape, while today rare flowers and wildlife are an added bonus. However, it's not only tourists who have benefited from Snowdonia over the years, as the people of Wales have also mined the riches to be found here as mineral deposits deep beneath the ground. But don't worry, the ground will not give way. This practice has long been stopped, as Snowdonia is now protected to preserve the natural beauty of the area for future generations to enjoy. Mining has for centuries been synonymous with the Welsh landscape, and coal mines once covered much of the countryside. Wales had two of the largest coalfields in Britain, and at the industry's peak there were 620 mines nationwide, although sadly today only a handful of small mines are still working, which has had a significant effect on unemployment levels. More than ever, Wales relies upon its tourist industry, and the landscape is certainly continuing to play its part. Many legends have developed surrounding this magnificent landscape, not least the one that claims King Arthur, the last Celtic sovereign of ancient Britain, and his knights are sleeping under these mountains, ready to wake if ever the nation is in need of their assistance. But this very neatly takes us across the border into England, where a number of other great landmarks claim to have King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table sleeping under their hills. This is Glastonbury Tor, very close to Glastonbury Abbey, where the great man himself and his queen Guinevere's tombs can be found. It is a truly fascinating landscape, but a short distance away again is another burial site for this knight of old, at Cadbury Castle. Today there is no castle to see, but many believe this was Camelot, the mythological kingdom of Arthur, and locals will even tell you that they've seen his ghost in the vicinity, the majority of them being on the way home from the pub at the time. Whatever your views on the King Arthur legend, it's well worth tracking down these beautiful landscapes, because wherever the much-loved king, if he existed at all, is laid to rest, these magnificent British landscapes are delightful on their own merit, regardless of any ancient celebrity who once passed through the district. England is a country of contrasts, although around the globe it does tend to be perceived as being a quaint and old-fashioned rural idyll, where thatched cottages and charming country pubs are the order of the day. However, this is very much a picture postcard idea of England, and whether dramatic coastline, industrial heartland or lakeland treasure, There is much more to the English landscape than chintz and cream teas. There are landscapes that many consider to have been spoilt by man's intervention with nature, but sometimes a skilled engineer can add an extra dimension to a vista. Take the beautiful Avon Gorge near the busy port of Bristol. It's quite remarkable on its own, but where it's crossed by the magnificent Clifton Suspension Bridge, it's the perfect example of art and nature in complete harmony. This stunning construction was the brainchild of Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the inspired 19th century industrialist who, way ahead of his time, quite literally changed the face of the landscape of Britain, surprisingly, for the better. He was seen as one of the real driving forces empowering the Industrial Revolution, and his Clifton Suspension Bridge is a marvel of technology that not only still functions in the 21st century as a bridge, but is as lovely to look at as it ever was. Sadly for Brunel, he never actually got to see the finished bridge because it was abandoned halfway through the building due to a lack of funds, and was only completed as a memorial to Brunel after his death in 1859 at the tragically young age of 53. Nevertheless, there are some landscapes that even in the 21st century remain completely untouched, and our journey through the landscapes of Britain could not be considered complete without including the magnificent range of hills known as the backbone of England, the Pennines. This is specific to England because the hills originated millions of years ago when England and Scotland were still separated by water. The northern portion of the landmass was then underneath a warm tropical sea, and as England moved closer to Scotland, deposits of crushed seashells, sand and earth were left behind as the sea began to recede. These deposits gradually became compacted over the ages to form the dark limestone and gritstone that is common throughout the Pennines. The last ice age was then responsible for shaping much of the landscape here, as the huge glaciers swept across the district, carving out many dramatic features, resulting in the now familiar sights of the Pennine Hills. This variation of rock types and rugged landscape proved useful to the many civilizations that tackled the Pennines, with the Romans being one of the first groups of settlers to really utilize the countryside's natural resources. They discovered that there was valuable lead ore beneath the Pennines and begun mining it. This continued over the centuries that followed and became intensive during the 18th and 19th centuries. Nowadays, the North Pennines are scattered with abandoned mine shafts and stone chimneys that are a testament to an industry that, much like the coalfields of Wales, now only has a handful of mines that remain open. The Pennines, although undoubtedly famous for lead, are also synonymous with Britain's textile industry, which still exists in small pockets across the Pennines today. Throughout the second half of the 17th century, fabric became a vital commodity, and as the Pennines had the perfect environment for textile production, just as the landscape of Scotland suited the whisky industry, the characteristic mills of the district began to appear. The steep hills, which are so delightful to look at, guaranteed many fast-flowing streams, excellent for factory owners who needed to power the water wheel of a mill. The soft water was also great for cleaning the fabric, and the damp climate proved perfect for spinning yarn. The Pennines were also ideal for sheep farming and wool production, and even today there are sheep roaming these timeless hills, despite most of the nation's textile requirements now being served by factories in the Far East. For anyone who wants to discover more about Great Britain's geography, both of the physical and human variety, this really is the place to come. The old disused mills have become integrated into the hillsides as nature has done its best to reclaim the land, and the views from the highest vantage points are truly spectacular. Now, pretty much wherever you travel in Britain, you will find sheep, from the Scottish Highlands to the Rocky Welsh Mountains, and the Pennines are far from being the only district to have benefited from wool. However, there is one particular region of the United Kingdom that really does owe its prosperity to wool and the hardy sheep. A visit to England will always benefit from a trip to the Cotswolds, situated in the southwest Midlands. Here you'll find a delightful mixture of the epitome of classic countryside and charming honey-coloured villages. After the dramatic majesty of the Pennines, a stroll over the Cotswolds will be a far more subdued and soothing affair. The Cotswolds are renowned for their rolling gentle hills, which are in fact known as wolds, giving the district its name, and of course the distinct golden limestone that the delightful houses and cottages are made of. These undulating hillsides and sweeping fields are rich in nutrients, and agriculture is still to this day an important element of the local economy. And of course, sheep, as you've just seen, can survive just about anywhere, but positively thrive on this rich pasture land. Even in the 21st century, the wool from Cotswold sheep is world famous for its high quality, and down through the ages these sheep have constantly been referred to as the lions of the Cotswolds. Today the counties of Gloucestershire and Wiltshire are most associated with the Cotswolds, and with so many royal residents, the region, as you can see for yourself, still enjoys great affluence. And this is all down to the wool trade that brought so much money to the area. In point of fact, it was the wool merchants who paid for most of the fine manor houses and cottages. The churches dating back to this time were actually known as wool churches, as these rich merchants also paid for the majority of them as well. Ironically, the region was so prosperous, the Industrial Revolution that dominated so many of Britain's landscapes passed the Cotswolds by. Today the wool trade has gone into a decline, and only a few tons of this excellent Cotswold wool is produced each year. However, the wonderful houses and churches that the wool trade paid for remain, and along with the unspoiled countryside, attract thousands of visitors each year from all over the world, as the Cotswolds have now become a very popular tourist destination. The prosperity of the region continues to flourish, and you only have to find one of the Cotswolds' many much-loved viewpoints to see why. Our journey around Great Britain has certainly taken in some quite remarkable locations, yet there is one very important type of landscape that we have still to explore. Visit Trafalgar Square in London, where Lord Nelson towers above all he surveys, or HMS Victory at Portsmouth, this great seafarer's flagship, and it's evident that Britain truly is a great island nation, and an island, of course, has a coast. There are many counties that have a seaside, and Cornwall, at the most southerly tip of Britain, is one of the most spectacular of them all. Today, this is an extremely popular holiday destination and boasts some of the loveliest beaches you will ever find. There may be steep rocky paths, and the weather may not always be sunny, but finding some of Cornwall's hidden and totally unspoiled coves will provide visitors with a fabulous geographical landscape that truly is beyond compare. Wherever you travel in Cornwall, you'll never be far from the sea, but if you do venture further inland, you'll never be far from that other great Cornish treasure, and we're not talking about clotted cream. Rocks are as characteristic of Cornwall as the sea itself, and whether you find yourself high up on Bodmin Moor or looking over a cliff, the landscape can only be described as dramatic. Equally, despite the obvious prosperity of the region over the centuries because of the fishing industry, the rocks have proved to be just as significant to the economic survival of this unique English county. There's a popular legend that says if you look down a mine anywhere in the world, you'll find a Cornishman looking for tin. And as bizarre as this may sound, Cornwall went through a tin mining boom in the 1700s that made mining the mainstay of many communities. At one stage, Cornwall had 2,000 tin mines stretching all over the region, and it seemed as though everyone in Cornwall who wasn't out fishing was down the mines of this lucrative industry. Men, women and children were employed in this dangerous occupation, and there are some who claim that you can still find fairy folk called the knockers down the old disused tin mines, who if you fed them your Cornish pasty would find you tin. Nevertheless, even the knockers couldn't keep the Cornish mining industry alive, and today the only mines in operation are for the tourist industry. Cornwall's main source of income is now tourism, which when you actually see the treasures of this county for yourself, it's easy to understand why this is possible. In fact, when it comes to the preservation of the landscapes of Britain, Tourism is of vital importance for all regions of the United Kingdom, as it brings in enough revenue each year to ensure that the countryside of this island nation is preserved for each new generation to enjoy. There is a school of thought when it comes to enjoying the countryside that suggests anything man-made is always a negative thing. But as we saw with the historic mills of the Pennines and the lovely stone cottages of the Cotswolds, this isn't always the case. And when it comes to transport down through the ages, there have been some very positive side effects that we can all enjoy to this day. Welcome to the Isle of Wight Steam Railway that has been lovingly preserved by enthusiasts to take visitors through the unique landscape of this delightful little island. There are steam societies like this all over Great Britain, and taking a steam train journey like this can put you in the heart of the many and varied landscapes nationwide. When you step back in time on one of these railways, it's well worth finding out a little more about the great engineers who literally made travel possible, and we'll begin with George Stephenson, the extraordinary genius who is considered to be the father of the railways that we all still rely on in the 21st century. Stephenson had always been interested in steam and engines, and he came up with his transport system to carry coal in the north of England, especially over the Pennines. While Stephenson was busy in the north, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the designer of the Clifton Suspension Bridge we saw earlier, was steaming ahead in the south as railway mania literally swept the land. While Stephenson was busy working on steady and reliable designs, Brunel was constantly preoccupied with speed and innovation, and at the incredibly young age of 27, he was appointed chief engineer of the Great Western Railway network, which linked London with the major port of Bristol and then to Cornwall beyond. When railway mania hit Great Britain, it followed in the footsteps of canal mania, and because the speed of the trains made the waterway transport system almost instantly obsolete, you can enjoy a narrowboat journey through many miles of countryside completely untouched since the early 1800s. The first canals were constructed by the engineer James Brindley, a man who would most certainly have inspired both Stephenson and Brunel. Brindley was commissioned by the 3rd Duke of Bridgewater to make a canal from his coal mine to the city of Manchester, as he needed a quicker way of transporting the very heavy loads. It was an extremely expensive venture, but the gamble proved worth taking, as the canal paid for itself in just a few years. When word spread, everyone wanted a canal to carry their goods, and they quickly sprang up all over the country. During the golden age of the canals between 1770 and 1830, almost 4,000 miles of canals were constructed that linked the entire nation with the great seaports and the rest of the world for just the briefest of moments in time. By the end of the 1830s, the use of the canals went into decline as the age of steam stormed over the horizon. In point of fact, the railways competed so closely with the waterways that the two forms of transport often ran on parallel lines until eventually steam won the day. Fortunately for the people of Great Britain today, canals and waterways have been given a new lease of life, like many of the other locations we visited throughout this film in the tourist industry. More and more people are using narrowboats for canal holidays, as the slow pace literally forces them to relax and unwind, offering a view of the landscapes of Britain that is totally unique. Also, in our developing ecologically conscious society, industry has once again turned to the waterways to transport their wares, making the future of the canals of Great Britain even more assured. There is, however, another way that you can enjoy travelling by water around Great Britain by using one of the nation's most spectacular of geographical features. Wherever you find a canal, you'll normally be able to spot a river not too far away, as many of our man-made canals run in and out of the river networks. These natural waterways really do hold the great British countryside together, having also been responsible since the birth of time for carving out many of the nation's geographical features. As we've already seen, the majority of the valleys across the British Isles have been shaped and cut by rivers and in their frozen form glaciers many millions of years ago. As the ice moved across the countryside, it eroded the softer rock and left much of the denser rock behind, making these wonderful hills and valleys that crisscross the countryside. Then, as time passed again, the ice began to melt and the valleys filled with water to eventually create the beautiful rivers and lakes that give us so much pleasure in the 21st century. Incredibly, these rivers are still active all these years later and follow the same cycle that they've always done. The water cycle of a river is extremely important to the country, and without rivers, much of the land would be constantly flooded because our rivers actually clear about 75% of the surface water that would otherwise cause a real problem. To understand the cycle of a river, we need to consider the three very different stages that a river flows through, wherever in the world it happens to be. The first stage is the fastest flowing, where the water is also fairly shallow at the outset. A river normally begins life from a spring that may be no bigger than a trickle of water, and it's amazing to think that all rivers, no matter how huge and grand, start out from such humble beginnings. Usually, as the river starts its inevitably long journey towards the sea, a number of these little trickles will join up to create what is known as a stream. You can normally recognise a stream because of its shallowness, and it usually flows over rocks and stones, moving so fast that it washes away the mud and sand that would otherwise line the riverbed. There will never be a huge number of fish in this part of the river's course, and any plants will be the species that can withstand the fast flow. Now, as the river keeps flowing and flowing, it grows bigger and bigger as it continues its journey. The second stage comes when the more mature river runs into its middle course, where it will usually be slower moving, meandering through the valleys. Rivers at this point will normally have a wide-ranging variety of fish and plants because of the slower movement and the increased depth. The river will continue to grow steadily, collecting rainwater as it heads towards the sea, and also might have other rivers joining it too. As the river makes steady progress, it matures, just like we do, into old age. Here, in the third and final stage, the river will head slowly out to sea as the long journey comes to an end. As it becomes more tidal, you will be able to see many more examples of coastal wildlife in and around the river. Eventually the river will slow down so much it forms an estuary, at which point it will finally meet the sea. And following a river from source to the sea can be a great way to really see the many features of the British landscape, from a clear crystal mountain spring to the mudflats of an estuary where the bird life certainly flourishes. Sadly, as our river has reached journey's end, so have we. Hopefully, you will have seen the landscapes of Britain from a different perspective, as it forever changes and evolves as time goes by. The countryside that is shaped by nature and the land that is worked by mankind has developed a true symbiotic relationship that doesn't always spell disaster. From rivers and beaches, moor and mountain, towns and fields, the British landscape really does have a colossal range of features, and what's more is on our very own doorstep for us to freely enjoy. There's no such thing as untouched countryside, as everywhere carries the marks of time, whether forged by nature's hand or man-made. So we must appreciate the landscape for what it is, a living, breathing entity which will remain long after our passing. As the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle once wisely said, "In all things of nature there is something of the marvellous." And although it's unlikely he was talking about our island nation, he nevertheless sums up the landscapes of Britain to perfection.